What we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network as we welcome you to the Season 5 Week 6 Around the NCAA recap show. Your Pitt Panthers coming off a 31-14 victory in the rematch of the ACC title game from last season, beating the NC State Wolfpack, who are off to a very tough start to this 2020 campaign. 1-4 now for NC State. Pitt, though, 4-0 and 1-0 in ACC conference play. Another great game for the Panthers, one where the defense really shined, especially cracking down against an inexperienced young passer who just wasn't able to make things happen until very late in the game. He kind of gave himself a little bit of stat padding as well late on. So a great game defensively for the Panthers. They did very well in the red zone yet again, 4 touchdowns and 5 trips, and a solid game for Kenny Pickett, 3 touchdowns against just 1 interception. He did have the 2 fumbles early on, one of which was lost, so tough break there, but a good solid performance by Pickett. Pitt also ran the football as well as could be expected. Sibley had a nice game, 81 yards, 56 from CJ London, so they combined for about 140 yards, 137 if you want to be exact. Good solid performance there. Jay Keys ran for the touchdown. He also caught a touchdown pass, 6 catches for 97 yards. Benjamin Ogden, his best game as a Panther, 4 catches for 42 yards, and 9 different receivers had catches for the Panthers, which is great to see the diversity of the offensive attack. Tough day for the offensive line, giving up 6 sacks though, and the Pitt defense only was able to get 4 of their own, including 2 on the final drive, so that really kind of helped bump things up. Kaiser Artis-Scott, though, his first interception, which was great to see. Also, Jacob Laughlin led the team in tackles. Had been Avery Heller from the majority of games this season, but Laughlin stepped up and had a nice game today, especially covering against the runs of Edwin Baker, who had a really solid game running the football for NC State, but wasn't able to make things happen. George McDonald, of course, the redshirt freshman from Woonsocket, Rhode Island, he played like a 72 overall player, that's for sure. Not a great game from him. He did have, of course, the 55-yarder at the end of the game in garbage time that helped bump his passing stats up, or he'd have finished with like 160 yards. They did run the ball well. Baker had a nice game. I've liked what I've seen out of the CPU rushing game here in the early going this season. It's definitely made things a bit more challenging. So I think when we come up against a team that has, a good halfback as well as a quarterback who can actually throw, that they can't just be one-dimensional, I think it'll make things very interesting moving forward. And a team that's been really incredible so far this season, Louisville, 48-27 over North Carolina. Big win for them. Wake, Duke also winning, both in non-conference games. BC upsetting Virginia 42-35, 23 fourth quarter points for the Eagles as they go ahead and knock off a big opponent in UVA. Georgia Tech gets a win over Syracuse. Florida State an easy win over Maryland. Clemson needs 10 fourth quarter points and 17 second half points to come from behind after nearly facing another horrific upset. They lost to Kent State earlier this year, and CMU also almost knocked off the Tigers, but Clemson does win. Miami 21 points in the fourth quarter to pull away from Virginia Tech. The Hokies did try and come from behind late, but Miami gets their first ACC win of the season, 42-35 over Virginia Tech in Blacksburg. We look at the top 25 results. Of course, we talk about some of those ACC games, but UCLA gets back to winning ways after losing 2 straight. They beat Kent State. Washington stays unbeaten away at Jordan-Hare Stadium. They knock off the Auburn Tigers and go to 4-0 on the season, a game that went into double overtime. Auburn sent it to overtime late in the fourth quarter. They traded field goals in the first overtime period, and then a 25-yard touchdown from Washington gave them the lead in the second overtime period, and they held Auburn from scoring and were able to come away with the victory. So big win for Washington as they try and rebound from a rough season last year and get back to the form that led them to a national title 2 years ago. Oregon with a huge touchdown, 3 seconds left. Sam Miller found Williams from a yard out to give them a 1-point victory. The Godfrey extra point pushed Oregon ahead of Colorado. They stay unbeaten 4-0, but they've been winning very tight games so far this season, so we'll see if that form can keep up for the Ducks, who've been, living by the skin of their teeth, living on thin ice so far this season. Iowa State, huge upset over Oklahoma State, 45-24 for the Cyclones. Big victory there for Iowa State to pull off the upset. Tennessee adds more misery to Georgia. Big victory for the Volunteers. Georgia drops to 1-5 on the season. And another huge upset. LSU, the reigning national champions, their 3rd loss on the season. Kelakolio's starting, and it was even worse. It was 38-13. The Tigers needed 2 fourth quarter touchdowns to even make things look respectable. at home against a Marshall team that Pitt had their way with earlier this season. So interesting to see how things go. And on the other side of a big SEC rivalry, Alabama 66 points as they smoke Akron 66-21. Penn State easy win over UConn. Houston with a blowout of Tulane. The Cougars look very good this season. Could we see a playoff showdown between Houston and Alabama? De'Aaron King versus his former team. Who knows? And Kentucky, big upset win for the Wildcats as they knock off South Carolina 42-35. With that week coming to an end, the Panthers did get some more great news. Daniel Warren ends up committing to the Panthers, so they do get a wide receiver signing. They also get JUCO outside linebacker Chaz Woods, the 3-star from Louisiana. Great signing for the Panthers there. He looks to be very good, as does the 4-star receiver Daniel Warren. Of course, a true freshman. I think Chaz Woods, if I remember correctly, is going to come in as a junior, but the Panthers losing 2 senior outside linebackers are going to need him to contribute right away because of the lack of depth they'll have at that position. We do miss out on a couple of players. We need a fullback in this recruiting class. We're not going to find it in Aaron Miller. He chooses Penn State. Brandon Cooper decides to go to Navy. So we do miss out on Tyree Montoya as well, who goes to Army. Woods, though, great player as we started scouting him now. 50% of the way scouted. He's 78 overall projected. Warren projected 77 overall, 92 speed. So a good signing there. Aaron Miller projected at 77. So it's a shame we're going to miss out on a pretty solid fullback, but the other guys we miss out on aren't particularly great. Montoya actually really interested me because of the fact that he was like 6'6". As an athlete, I thought he could play safety, linebacker, really anywhere, but he doesn't look too spectacular and doesn't have great speed. So we're able to finish scouting the middle linebacker. Is going to come in as a 4-star. Bit disappointing that he's only 70 overall, but because we're losing 2 senior middle linebackers, we're going to need somebody to come in, and so he's going to be a good player to add depth at least to start off, and probably will play as a true freshman. Great game from Michael Wilson, 7 touchdowns, 400 yards passing from Mizzou, who's been an incredible surprise this season. And wouldn't you know it, yet again, Jawan Pass, another ACC Offensive Player of the Week. I think he's well on his way to ACC Player of the Season and first-team All-ACC. Pretty tough for everybody to keep up with the incredible season that the redshirt senior for Louisville is having. And that season does get him into the Heisman watch now. He's at 4th. Ian Welsh, actually another big game for the Army running back, moves up to 2nd. Bowman Sells, the Houston quarterback, is 3rd now. Jawan Pass is 4th after another big game, and Stephen Davis Jr., the Auburn running back, had a 211-yard performance despite losing to Washington. So a great game for him, at least keeps him in the running after a solid start to the campaign despite Auburn picking up another loss. And some interesting movement in the polls. Texas actually jumps up to number 1, Bama to 2, and Ohio State falls back to 3 despite everybody winning in the top 10. Incredible there. Pitt goes up to 4, Penn State falls back to 5. Both teams won, so interesting to see them shift around. Washington's up to 7th now with their victory over Auburn at 4-0, so a lot of undefeated teams you'll see moving closer to the top 10. TCU now at 12, not even playing, and they jump up 8 spots, so a big bonus for them. Auburn falls back to 15 with their loss. Oklahoma State, the one team to fall out of the top 10 with a loss. They drop all the way back to number 20 after losing to an Iowa State team that was brutal last year. And LSU, after winning the national championship last year, is out of the polls with their loss to Marshall. So very tough season for Coach O and the Tigers as they drop to 3-3 on the season. Big games in this upcoming week, though, in the ACC slate. Virginia, after losing last week, takes on Oregon State, who's had a great start to their season. A huge ACC game, Louisville at Clemson. You've also got South Carolina at Florida State, which is the Chick-fil-A kickoff game of the season. For some reason, it's taking place in week 7, so they have a neutral site game in week 7. That should be a lot of fun to see, but it's interesting how it came in this week. Texas hosts Oklahoma. The Red River Shootout should be incredible. 2 huge rivals taking each other on. Oklahoma looking to get things moving in the right direction, while Texas looks to take advantage of the fact they're now number 1 in the country. Oregon State, like I said, they don't have a spectacular team, but their offense has been incredible this season. Number 9 in the country, start out 4-0. They had that huge upset win over UCLA, and if they win again, I think they'll be into the polls for sure. Washington hosts Stanford, a game that, the Huskies look like the much more dominant team this season, but Stanford has a lot of talent, so it could be a tough game. Louisville-Clemson should be a fantastic ACC showdown. Herb Street likes the Cardinal, who've been very, very good this season. Their offense has been incredible. Jawan Pass is just doing whatever he wants on the field. Clemson's really underachieved, but they do have Zarek Cooper, 99 overall at quarterback, is thrown for 316 yards a game. The Tigers they're turning the ball over too much and haven't been able to put the football in the end zone. If they can resist those turnovers, they have the opportunity to pull a victory for sure. Another interesting game is that Ole Miss, they're 4-2 on the season. I thought they were a team that they started, I think, 3-0, 4-0 before losing to Missouri. I thought they could have been a top 10 team this season. I still think they can, so that'll be a great showdown between them and Auburn. Florida State hosting South Carolina, like I mentioned, actually not hosting, but a neutral site game between those teams. That should be a great non-conference matchup that you don't typically see later in the season. We got Kansas State, Oklahoma State. That's a matchup between two teams that were very good last season, not as great this year. A&M, Texas A&M, interestingly, 5-0 on the season. They were a dark horse team to get into the SEC title picture. They've started off really, really well and could make things interesting, if they can continue racking up the wins here so far this season. Penn State at Nebraska. Nebraska, a very good team. Penn State, not necessarily as talented as they have been in years past, but they've started off very, very well. They're in the top 5, and so that should be a good matchup to see if they are for real. And a great test for the Panthers now. They haven't had the toughest starting schedule. It's been helped by the fact that NC State has struggled so far in the season, so it's been 4 pretty lukewarm matchups for the Panthers so far. Now they finally get to take on a ranked opponent. Wake Forest, number 25 in the country, though. The Demon Deacons have struggled this year. They had a big drop-off and loss of talent last season. They have Jamie Newman, who's taken over at quarterback. He's a good player, but beyond that, they lost 2 95 overall or better halfbacks this season, and they lost a bunch of wide receivers as well, so they don't have nearly the level of talent on offense, and it has shown. Their leading receiver is Curry, only 17 catches. Newman is passing just a little bit over 50% for the season, but interestingly that you'll notice is because they don't have any great running backs, to be honest, Newman is actually their leading rusher, 76 yards per game for the quarterback. In their last game, he ran for 153 yards just by himself, so he's been very incredible. And if you look at their lineup, take out the kicker and the punter, and they only have 3 or 4 guys at 90 overall. We're barely a quarter of the way through the roster, almost halfway now, and we're at 70 overall already. They've had such a drop-off in talent. The fact that they're still ranked number 25 is honestly shocking. They do have Newman, who's a good running quarterback. He's got good instincts. He hasn't been great this season for them, but he's a player it's solid. I think he's an improvement on what we saw from NC State last week. So I think, if anything, you can expect a little bit more of a productive opportunity from the Wake Forest offense because they have a solid quarterback. But the rest of their talent just isn't great. Roderick Johnson has okay speed, but he hasn't done too much for Wake, and they don't really have much beyond him at halfback. At wide receiver, same thing. They just don't have a high level of talent. J.R. Curry and Tom Garcia are their top 2 receivers. They don't even touch 80 overall. And they don't really have any burners either. Bell, 95 speed, is their fastest guy, but he doesn't have the best overall ability. 72 overall kind of across the board on their depth receivers as well. They don't have a standout tight end. Their offensive line has a couple of good players. Their left guard, Surin, is actually really, really good. The senior has been fantastic for him. Teleni Surin, the redshirt senior, 95 overall. But beyond that, they're not spectacular. Low 80s across the line. Tyler Watson's pretty solid, the redshirt senior, but nothing very intimidating on the offensive side of the ball. And it's the same thing with the defense. They just don't have a great depth of talent. I think they overachieved on the success of Kendall Hinton, and the couple of great running backs that they had last year just provide them so much offensive talent that allowed them to be very good. I think they finished the season 9-4. They were 9-2 before losing to NC State to try and make the ACC championship game, and then they lost their bowl game as well. The one guy we got to watch out for, though, on the defensive side of football, LaRonde Liverpool, redshirt senior middle linebacker. He's a captain, projected All-American for them. He has been a nightmare. He had a pick for them last year against us. He had a couple of player of the weeks for them last year. He was a fantastic player, and he's been very, very good at the heart of their defense. Middle linebacker is very good. I think they actually play a 3-4. defensively, if I remember correctly. So they'll have 2 middle linebackers on the field and some really, really good players that are going to certainly give us fits throughout the lineup. Benny Fox, also good at free safety. He's a young player, but he's good. Luis Howell's an interesting guy to watch as well. 82 overall free safety, but he's like the backup for them on their depth chart in every position. I'm pretty sure he's the backup at every linebacker position and the backup at every secondary position. Because he's not the starting free safety, he plays all over the field, and he's a dangerous player that we'll have to watch out for. I'd expect him to have a number of tackles for Wake. But I think if we can play our game, even though we'll be away from home, if we can limit the turnovers that have really plagued us so far this season, I think it's a game that we should win. We have the greater level of talent that should hopefully lead us to a victory and keep us on pace for another very, very good season. So let me know what you think is going to happen in the game, guys. Will we win? What's the final score going to be, as well as any of the other big games that are on tap? Who's going to win that huge Louisville-Clemson game that could potentially decide who may make the ACC championship game from the Atlantic Division? Potentially, if we can continue our winning ways, we'll face off with them in the ACC championship game. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hail to Pitt, and we'll see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.